welcome back to my channel. Now you may know that I've already done a Swiss meringue buttercream tutorial when I was making American frosting at the same time and comparing the two, but since then it's been about 2 years and I've actually learnt a lot more about Swiss meringue buttercream, and many of you come to me with different questions asking why it went wrong, what did you do, etc. So I thought I'd do another tutorial explaining every single step of the way, what to look out for to prevent it from going wrong, how to flavour it, the use of it, etc. So even if you've watched my other tutorial on how to make buttercream, I recommend watching this because you may learn a few more things. So I'm going to begin by making a Swiss meringue. So you get French meringue, Italian meringue and Swiss meringue. There are probably other versions too, but those are the 3 main ones. So essentially we're making a Swiss meringue first. And to do that, you need double the amount of sugar to egg white. So here I've got 300 grams of sugar and 150 grams of egg whites in here. Now, the buttercream recipe is super easy. It's the same amount of butter as there is sugar. So for example, if you're doing 300 grams sugar, 150 egg white, it's 300 grams butter as well. But I have a trick. So as you're aware, I decorate a lot of my cakes with meringue kisses. Now there's no point in making a whole batch of Swiss meringue and then a whole batch again for the buttercream, especially when you're only using about 5 kisses. So I actually increase the amount of egg white and sugar, mix that, heat it up, and then when it becomes a meringue, I actually take out some of that meringue, pipe meringue kisses with it, and then it goes back to the same quantity to use with the butter. Now that's probably really confusing to hear, but I've written the explanation below and the quantities too, and I'll basically explain it as I'm going anyway. So I've got some simmering water here, and so what we want to do is heat the sugar and egg white together so the sugar dissolves. So I'm going to put the sugar directly into the mixer bowl where the egg white is, and then give that a good stir. I like using a spatula, some people use a whisk. Now, you're not incorporating air at this point, so the whisk is kind of useless. Also with a spatula, you can continuously scrape down the sides of the bowl. So that's really important in itself, because if you're not scraping down the bowl, you're leaving some sugar granules on the side, which if they're whisked into the meringue and don't melt, they can cause little explosions of sugar in the oven, which you want to avoid. So I'm going to put this onto the simmering water and heat it to 63 degrees Celsius. Reason it's that temperature is because we're not cooking this, unlike you do with meringue kisses or other meringues. We're going to add butter and almost eat it raw, so it has to be cooked to that temperature to make it safe to eat, especially for pregnant people. Apparently in this country, in England, it's safe to eat raw egg anyway, but heating it to 63 degrees just gives it that extra safety. So while it's on the heat, I'm going to continuously scrape down the bowl to make sure all that sugar is mixed in. And I'm also going to mix it by scraping the underneath, because I want that temperature to be dispersed evenly throughout the egg white mix. Now I'm actually using a surface reader thermometer, so these infrared thermometers. And you can use a probe. If you are using a surface reader, make sure that you're mixing it as you're taking the temperature, otherwise it's just going to read the surface, not temperature all the way through. So when it's starting to get near the temperature, you see that the consistency gets a lot looser as well. And then once it's come up to temperature, you can put it directly on the stand mixer. So lots of you ask if you could do this by hand. You can, you just need to stand there for quite a while because you need it to meringue consistency so it's nice and firm, thick peaks. Full speed, and you whisk it until the meringue is formed. So when the meringue is formed, you can stop whisking. You can see it's really nice and stiff. You could do the meringue, you know, just tip it on your head kind of thing, which I was discussing with someone else the other day and I just thought, what a silly thing to do. So going back to what I was saying before, where I can now take out some meringue and pipe some kisses, and this will go back to the ratio. I'll try and explain it even clearer now. So, like I said, I had 150 egg whites and 300 sugar. So I would have put in 300 grams of butter as well, But if I've only got 250 grams of butter, it means I need 125 grams of egg white and 250 grams of sugar. So the original calculations that I put in were 75 grams over what it should have been, because there was 25 grams extra egg white and 50 grams extra sugar. So if I take out 75 grams of meringue, it will go back to 125 egg white, 250 sugar, and therefore match the 250 butter I put in, if that makes sense. So like I said, I'll explain it better in the comments below, so if your brain's kind of going a bit crazy, then just read below. But it's basically a ratio recipe, so you can do it with any quantities as long as you're keeping the ratio the same. So I've got some scales and a cup with a piping bag which I've painted the inside with colour for my meringue kisses. I have a whole tutorial just on meringue kisses if you want to see that in more detail. So I'm going to measure 75 grams of meringue into the piping bag. And you can see how lovely and thick it is too. So once again, I've taken out the excess. This is back down to 125 egg white, 250 sugar, and ready for 250 butter. So I hope that's become a little bit more clear. Now just a couple of things. If you are piping meringue kisses, this bowl doesn't have to be completely cool. Because it's going into an oven anyway and they're cooking off at 100 degrees Celsius, it doesn't matter if the meringue is still a bit warm. However, if we are adding butter in, that's when it has to be completely cold, but I'll get to that in a minute. So this can just stand on the side. You don't have to continue whisking that. When we add the butter, we break it up anyway, so it doesn't matter if the meringue collapses a bit, but if you are piping kisses, you want to do that straight away. So I'm just going to pipe a few kisses onto the tray and cook them because I've made the meringue anyway. So you can see that I've got quite a few meringues on there, and that was only 75 grams of meringue. So if you're only making 1 or 2 cakes, you really don't need to pipe a lot of meringues out, especially because you're only going to use about 5 or 6 on the cake. So I'm going to cook these off at 100 degrees like I would normally, and then get back to the buttercream. So when the time comes to add the butter, you need to be aware of a few things. Firstly, which I probably should have mentioned before, is that if the bowl is too full, so if you're using a small mixer and you've put in too much meringue, the air doesn't incorporate in the right way and kind of doesn't catch the buttercream. So it's always better making a slightly smaller amount, and maybe you have to do that twice if you're doing a large cake, if you've only got a small mixer. So I actually use my larger mixers, even for smaller amounts, just to be sure that the air is incorporated enough. And the second thing, which is most important, is that this bowl has to be completely cold, so no heat whatsoever. I remember when I first started to make Swiss meringue buttercream, it kept going wrong and it kind of stayed like soup. That's basically because if this is warm and you add the butter in, the butter melts, which makes a lot of sense, to be honest. Now there are ways to rectify that. So if you add the butter, which I'll show you now, and it stays all liquidy and doesn't come together, you can stop the mixer, put it in the fridge, let it firm up, and then go back on the mixer. Alternatively, you can actually empty the whole of the buttercream, which obviously hasn't worked, into a large Tupperware and refrigerate that overnight. Then take it out the next day, put it back in the mixer bowl and whisk it up, and then blowtorch slightly the sides, which kind of heats it up slightly enough for it to come together. If you don't heat it up, it will just break apart. So to be honest, I probably should have shown you one that's gone wrong, but I didn't. But there basically are different ways how to rectify it going wrong. However, if you follow this step by step, you shouldn't be in that position. So this bowl is completely cold. I can feel no heat whatsoever. So I'm going to put it on a medium speed, and I'm not going to touch the speed until the buttercream comes together. So you may be tempted to put the speed higher because nothing's working, or it looks like it's starting to curdle. Do not touch the speed until the buttercream is forming. I'll also point out what you're looking for, which gives you a sign to show that it is working. So I'm going to put this on a medium. So you can see the meringue kind of breaking up a bit and it's a bit collapsed. Now, again, if you're going to pipe meringue kisses with it, use the fresh meringue for that. Don't pipe them after having rested the meringue because they might not work as well. I'm using a high quality butter. I think that helps the buttercream stay white. If you use low quality butters, they often have oils in which make the buttercream slightly yellow. I get a lot of people asking how it keeps so white. I think it's the meringue base and good quality butter, that's it. Now the butter has to be room temperature, so soft enough to mold in your fingers, but obviously not too soft because otherwise it'll be too wet. And you want chunks about this size, and then just pop them in the bowl and let it mix in. It's as simple as that. I like squeezing it in my hands before I put it in. I'm not necessarily waiting for that butter to mix in. I'm just going in with large chunks, one at a time. If you have taken your butter out the fridge, I would recommend taking it out before you start the buttercream and cut it into cubes. And once it's time to use the butter, it should be soft enough to add to the meringue. So if you're in a hot country or it miraculously gets hot like it did last year in England, that's a good trick to keep your butter cold. So once you've put all the butter in, you keep it on a medium speed, like I said, and you keep mixing it, and it looks as though the mix is about to curdle or split, and a lot of people panic and turn it off. Don't. Keep it mixing because that is what catches and then makes buttercream. So it's about to happen now, and I look on the very sides of the bowl and I can see it splitting, and then within seconds it kind of catches and then it starts to form the buttercream. And then once the buttercream is forming, then you can turn up the speed and mix all the meringue in. Like that. And that is how you get the perfect buttercream consistency. So like I said, a lot of people freak out when it starts to split, but that is a good sign. And that's something I had to learn, and especially explaining to people what to look out for. So once the buttercream is formed, you may still have scrapings of meringue around the bowl. So I like to take off the bowl and give it a scrape down with a spatula. So especially on the bottom where the meringue could have been caught. And then just give it an extra whisk. So this buttercream is really good at holding different flavors. So things like Nutella, peanut butter, Biscoff spread, something thick like that. You can literally go in with tablespoons at a time, mix it in, and then taste it and see if it's strong enough. It really doesn't change the consistency that much. When it comes to liquids such as coffee or berry juice, which are really delicious, it can tend to split the buttercream. However, if you keep it on a mixer, or if you're doing it by hand, and beat it really fast, it does come together again. So if you make this as a base, it's really easy and simple to flavor. When it comes to flavoring it with chocolate, don't use cocoa powder because it's quite gritty. I would actually melt some chocolate, leave it to cool slightly because obviously you don't want to put hot chocolate in buttercream, otherwise it melts, and then pour it in and mix it through. Dark chocolate Swiss meringue buttercream is delicious. It's one of my favorite flavors. It literally tastes like chocolate mousse, and it also gets it really silky and smooth. And you may notice that the buttercream looks a bit like cottage cheese. It looks like there's quite a lot of air inside. What I like to do is actually pipe my buttercream in between the cake layers and then spread it out with a palette knife. And as I'm spreading, the air bubbles go. If you don't want to do that, you can give it a mix by hand and then it will knock out the air bubbles naturally. So even just by mixing it a few times like this, it does become that little bit smoother and creamier. So when it comes to colouring Swiss meringue buttercream, it takes a little bit more colour than American frosting would. I think it's to do with the fat content. But firstly, it's important to get good colours because sometimes certain colours leave streaks in the buttercream. I use magic colours. I think they mix in really well and they've got a huge range of colours too. So I'll just show you how easy it is to colour buttercream. I'm just going to take a little amount and then all I need to do is add a small amount of gel food colouring. and then mix it through. And like I was just saying, mixing by hand knocks out the air bubbles, so you'll notice how smooth this will get once I've coloured it. So it gets beautiful and smooth. So what I like to do is fill up my cakes with the white buttercream, or if you've made chocolate buttercream, then it's going to be brown. And then the outer coating will either be white or a colour, and it gets nice and smooth. Now, if you are leaving the cake white, then I would recommend just giving this a mix by hand just to knock out the air bubbles and make it as smooth as possible. So that is your masterclass tutorial in Swiss meringue buttercream. Now, a lot of different factors can still affect it, such as if you leave your crumb coat in the fridge too long and then go over with another layer of Swiss meringue buttercream, it can actually start to chill when it's on the cake, and then the more you scrape it, it kind of starts coming off the cake. So things like that is down to personal kind of experience and what kitchen you're working in. Obviously, humidity can affect things, so try it out. Hopefully it will work, and hopefully I've explained it to the maximum. I don't think I can actually explain it better than I have. So good luck, try it out, don't be scared. I've actually transformed a lot of people who are using American frosting over to this buttercream. It's super delicious, so smooth to work with, you can flavour it easily. I can't rave about it enough. If you do try it out, then please tag me at George's Cakes on Instagram. I love seeing your creations anyway, but especially if this is your first time using Swiss meringue buttercream. If you have any suggestions of other tutorials, then please write in the comments below. Give this video a thumbs up, please share it and subscribe to my channel. I will be truly grateful, and in the meantime, we'll see you very soon.